Doug Gordon is pretty much known as a Mr. Rogers type of a guy. Lyndsie Russell is very similar in her presentation. They're wonderful trial lawyers, but the story that I'm about to tell you about took them out of the context of what they would normally do here in their trial work in Fresno, California. That trial work normally involves catastrophic injury cases, and that's what they do, and they're excellent at what they do. But it was about 4.5 years ago that they got a phone call that rocked their world. It changed what they do. A friend of a friend called and said they knew somebody that needed help. Well, the person that needed help happened to not be in this area. They were up in the Sacramento area. Undocumented, illegal, schizophrenic, Spanish-speaking individual who needed the help of somebody who would come to this individual's aid that they could barely communicate with. And on top of it, what was required was to take on the federal government, the state government, and the county of Sacramento. And on top of that, they had to take on issues of qualified immunity because there were government claims involved. They also had to take on statutory immunities, and they had to deal with micro limitations. On top of that, that wasn't their normal playing field. They were not experienced in 1983 litigation. So what they had to do was to become street fighters and leave their Mr. Rogers world and enter into the world of street fighting, which they did par excellence. And let me tell you about it. Mr. Mendez, as I told you, was an undocumented illegal, been picked up by ICE and taken to a jail in Sacramento County. When he got there, he told them, as well as he could communicate, that twice in the past couple of months, he'd been hospitalized for suicidal attempts. He was schizophrenic. He was on medication to deal with it. And he was trying to make sure that he was going to be given the care that he needed. Unfortunately, they just dropped the ball entirely. The folks from ICE didn't communicate what they were supposed to. The people in the jail didn't communicate. And those involved in mental health care absolutely dropped the ball. The people involved in the mental health care were the UC Board of Regents. At UC Davis, their psychiatry department was contracted to provide the health care at the jail. So here's Doug and Lyndsie taking on the federal government, the state government, and the county with the various malfeasance on so many levels. Right away, they were hit with a motion to dismiss by the federal government. And boom, the federal court knocked the federal government out of the case, so they were dismissed. But these two remained undaunted in their quest, and they continued to dig deep to find out what they could about everything that had gone wrong. And in the process of that, they found that the medical documents that were being used by UC Davis were flawed and inadequate. They weren't even paying attention to what information they did have. They weren't communicating it. They weren't providing care to Mr. Mendez. Then on top of that, what was really critical was they dug so deep that they found a secret review that had been done of that county jail by a team of experts who'd been called in to look at the psychiatric services provided in the jail. It was all at the impetus of a public service organization that had threatened to sue the county over these issues. And only 3 years before, to put off those threats of a lawsuit, the county agreed to have this audit done. The audit found scathing reviews of their failure to prevent suicide and failure to provide mental health services. But they agreed that they would keep this confidential at that point in time. But through the work of Doug and Lyndsie and how things got triggered, ultimately, through their work, that report became public and is now on the World Wide Web. And that report, combined with the extra work that they did, helped bring to light all the flaws in the system. But of course, it wasn't easy. Along the way, Doug had to fly to the state of Washington and then to Nebraska and then to Texas. And so this team had to dig deep and go across the country to gather everything they needed to prove the flaws in the system, the flaws in the mental health care, and they succeeded in doing so. And in doing this, they were able to discover all the problems that they had with the healthcare system. I think what I didn't mention, because I'm not tracking on my notes, the failures that happened, what resulted in Mr. Mendez, was an attempted suicide attempt. While he was in the jail for more than 2 months without care, he climbed up 2 flights of stairs, jumped off in an open pod, 4:30 in the morning, landed head first on the ground below and was rendered a quadriplegic. He didn't die, but he was quadriplegic. So because of this catastrophic injury, they were moving forward to try to prove all the flaws in the system, the failure of care for Mr. Mendez, and they succeeded in doing that. They were able to prove that it should have been stopped, if nothing else, by those involved in the healthcare. Now, you know, they also had to deal with that whole business of qualified immunity. And even though they had a United States Supreme Court case that was virtually on point before a federal judge in Sacramento, he initially just said, you know, I'm looking at qualified immunity. So the the county, for their neglect in not watching this prisoner the way they should have, was dismissed. The feds are out, the state is out, and it's going against UC. If anybody's done any medical negligence cases, you know the burdens of MICRA and proving medical negligence cases. But they were able to keep that case alive, which is especially difficult because when you're dealing with healthcare in an institution like that, you have to show willful and wanton and intentional disregard of their rights. And they were able to overcome that and succeed in overcoming the motion for summary judgment. They were headed for a jury trial, and within only about 6 weeks of trial, finally UC came forward, put together a settlement that provided the funds their client needed by way of a Medi-Cal special needs trust. So their client now has the care he needs for life. The report, as I said, has gone worldwide. So now there's accountability, not only in that county, but I believe throughout the system, that folks can see when there's flaws and failures in the criminal justice system, in incarcerated individuals who need psychiatric and mental health care, the things that shouldn't happen. And when they do, they're going to meet up with street fighters like Doug and Lyndsie, and they're going to have to pay the price. I think they deserve the award of Street Fighter of the Year.